the Boxers Trainers Channel this morning. Look, we have an interesting subject today, right? I'm well aware of the fact that this came out 3 or 4 days ago in regards to the separation between father son Brian Norman Jr. and Brian Norman Sr., the former WBO welterweight champion of the world. Brian Norman Jr. lost to Devin the Dream Haney by a majority decision, 12-round decision. So, in my opinion, it was a good fight, but I just don't think that Brian Norman Jr., who was 28 wins, one loss, 22 by knockout, right? 25 years of age, right? Had the tenacity to go in the ring with Devin the Dream Haney, right? And be victorious. Now, the interesting thing about this particular subject is prior to this fight taking place, I had conversation with Brian Norman Sr., right? And I told Brian Norman Sr. that, in my opinion, I didn't think that his son had the skill set with the style of boxing or fighting that Brian Norman Jr. elected to use to go in and challenge Devin Haney wouldn't work, right? I offered up an alternative style, which we had plenty of time to work with. But let me say this, in all fairness, as a people, especially as men and black people, right, we have a tendency to let our emotions and our ego interfere with competent judgment, right? And this is the case with Brian Norman Sr., right? I have no experience with dealing with Brian Norman Sr., other than the fact that I did have a conversation with him. And I actually, this conversation started because my mom is a Norman, right? And I believe of the genetics associated with when we were brought from Africa, right? We were brought in and labeled different slave masters' names. So my slave master's mother's last name was Norman, as is the case with Brian Norman Sr. And Brian Norman Sr.'s family, right? They're Normans. So it is a distinctive possibility that we are relatives. Now, I didn't get a chance to go off into that because Brian Norman Jr., again, is egotistic, right? His projection, as we had conversation, was all negative, right? And I didn't get a chance to have a definitive conversation with him, but I was only able to get out, right, about the boxing aspect of his son versus Devin the Dream Haney. And it was my opinion that we have time enough to go to the table and master out some type of technique to challenge Devin the Dream Haney, right? That would have been a masterful win for Brian Norman Jr. had Brian Norman Sr. had the emotional attachment to common sense. He did it. So I'm saying this to say that Brian Norman Jr. did a diligent and good thing for his career. No disrespect intended toward Brian Norman Sr., right? But the fact remains the same, is Brian Norman Jr. has a litany of I know, I know, I know, I know, I know. I know, I know, I know. My wife was at the door and it was locked. Anyway, Brian Norman Jr. wants to be a world champion again, right? He didn't want to lose, but that has happened. We had to get past that, right? But in my opinion, Brian Norman Sr. wasn't talented enough to show his son different boxing styles. You know what I mean? And I kind of explained this to him when we had this conversation, this brief conversation, right? The fact of the matter is, there is a litany of different styles out there that the boxers that come up today don't have conversation with those styles. B, be the fact that their trainers don't have that type of experience, right? Now, as far as I'm concerned, one of the styles that I suggested or am suggesting for Brian Norman Jr. is Marlon Starling. Anybody know about Marlon Starling? Marlon Starling came up in the era of Tommy Hearns, Sugar Ray Leonard, and the likes of that era, right? He was what I call the peekaboo man, right? His defense was basically covered with a high guard, right? You know what I mean? The peekaboo, high guard, right? In and out, right? And the thing about Marlon Storm was he was a technician with that high guard. It was hard to hit him, right? Here's the deal. Brian Norman Sr. didn't have any experience with the high guard because he allowed his son to get popped and dropped by Devin the Dream. Now, that's enough to suggest that he didn't have enough experience with the high guard, right? And it was a lot of things about about Brian Norman Jr. in that event with Devin the Dream Haney led me to believe that he was incompetent in a lot of ways in different in the area of being able to adjust. He didn't have the capability to adjust, right? And once he was dropped, Devin the Dream Haney took all the fight out of him, right? Now, taking nothing, absolutely nothing from Brian Norman Jr., right? Brian Norman Jr. do have the ability to be great, right? He has the ability to be great because he trains up to that expectation. That's what it's about when it comes to championship form, right? You have to get in the gym every day, 7 days a week, right? And work on your craft, right? You have to be very inventive. You know what I mean? You have to take every negative aspect of what you think or your trainer thinks is wrong and work on it, right? And that can go on forever, right? And in fact, it does go on forever as in a great boxer, right? He keeps and always find ways to improve his craft. A crafty champion is the best champion. Look at Shakur Stevenson. Look at Torrance Bud Crawford. Look at Devin the Dream Haney, minus the asterisk, right? These cats work on their craft, right? And I took notice of the fact that when Devin the Dream took that loss, right, I was a little afraid whether he could recover that loss, right? After the Ramirez fight, right, I was like, damn, right, that didn't look good to me, right? But when he came back and fought Brian Norman Jr., he had recovered, right? What happened was he got back in the gym and put in the necessary work to get back up to himself, right? Certain dudes, I believe, are unbeatable, like Floyd Money Mayweather, right? Money Mayweather was unbeatable, right? Torrance Bud Crawford, in my opinion, is unbeatable, right? Youssef is unbeatable, right? These cats are unbeatable because they maintain that mental state that I am unbeatable. And they get in the gym and they put in the work necessary to be unbeatable. Now, a lot of you people are the audience say, oh, that's impossible. No, it's not. It is realistic. It is the approach that a championship class style boxer takes in order to be great. You know, how do I know? Because I put in that work. Contrary to the fact that you guys know nothing about Jack Daniels and his boxing skills and his techniques, right? The fact of the matter is that it was a time in my career that I thought and felt and believed that Marvin Hagler, I thought middleweight. I believed and trained myself and conditioned myself in the gym to believe that Marvin Hagler was actually a bum. A bum. You know what I mean? That transpired because that's the way I trained. I trained a person that seeks greatness, trained to defend anything. You know what I mean? Defend anything. And see, reason why I counted Shakur Stevenson in this, right? Because Shakur Stevenson gets hot a little too much for me, right? But he's still growing. You know what I mean? So I can't really take any negative away from what he's doing because he's a great boxer, right? But in order to be great, I'm trying to make a point. In order to be great, like the possibility exists for Brian Norman Jr. to be a great boxer, right? You gotta work. You gotta have the type of trainer that believes that every day is worth coming to the gym and making your craft better. Better. It's about better, right? It's about being able to defend off anything a boxer throws at you, your opponent, right? You know what I mean? You have to be comfortable, relaxed, and with the mindset, and have the training regimen, right? Where you say, oh man, Bud Crawford is an example of that. You know what I mean? Bud Crawford is one of the few boxers that I've seen in my life, right, that makes miraculous adjustments. You have to be able to adjust. You know, that's what the game is about. Boxing is about being able to adjust, right? Slip. You know what I mean? It's just a litany of different things that you have to be able to do in order to be great people. You know what I'm saying? And that's what I believe in. That's the way and here's the deal. They have a lot of trainers out there, man. You know what I mean? But as I view these boxers today, they're either one or two dimensional, right? They're either forward, they either move forward or they move backwards. I believe in pivot. The pivot, moving backwards, I don't know. I don't believe in moving backwards. I believe in pivot to the right, pivot to the left, right? And once you pivot, that person is in a position, right, where you can sock him. And pivoting, not moving back and forth, pivoting. You know what I mean? You don't see that in boxing today. You don't. You simply don't see pivoting. I mean, let me say this in all fairness, right? I did see. That's what I say about Brian Norman Jr. Brian Norman Jr. has a unique chance to be a great champion, right? Brian Norman Jr. pivots. He pivots off his opponent. He pivots. Pivoting is one of the techniques that a great boxer uses in his arsenal, right, to defend and defeat his opponent. Pivot, not moving. That's too much energy. You heard me? That's too much damn energy. Moving backwards and forwards. Backwards and forwards, right? No. Swing. Pivot. You know what I mean? You know what I mean? And most of the great boxers today, again, Torrance Smith Crawford, Usyk, they pivot. So you gotta start paying attention when you watch these boxers today, how they move, frontwards and backwards. You know what I mean? If you move with that type of rhythm, you constantly move with that type of rigor, you are easily able to be figured out, buddy. You know what I mean? It's about being smart in the gym. It's about being smart in the ring. Sparring, whatever. It's about being smart, right? And I'm telling you, cats, put some pivot in your game, man. You know what I'm saying? But back to Brian Norman Jr. The reason why I really made this video, because I have been trying to reach out to Brian Norman Jr., right? It don't cost him a dime. It don't cost him a penny, right? To call me up and let me see what I can do with it. It don't cost him nothing, right? There's no contractual arrangement when it comes to a trainer, right? That's one of the things about boxing that I kind of disagree with, right? Everything is contractually agreed, but except trainers. I'm not going to say except training, but training is one of the areas of boxing that isn't contractually obligated, right? We need. Thanks for the donation, although I can't get it yet. But I appreciate you for making the gesture. Shout out to to spend 500. Uh, uh, but yeah, we gotta see more boxers learn the art of pivoting. Okay, that being said, man, look, I feel good about today's performance in on the chat. You know what I mean? Because I know that sooner or later I'm gonna get my opportunity to let one of these boxers, right, be great. Be great. It's about being great. It's not just about being boxing, taking part. Oh hell no! It's about being great. It's about being great. That being said, there you go, my man in the house, Bruce, gas, boxing, jazz, and more. Salute to you, brother. Salute to you. That being said, you caught the tail end, but and I was cooking, but I got to go. That being said, hit that subscription button, hit the like button, drop a comment in the comment section, and let me know what y'all think about the backwards and forwards moving of a boxer versus pivot. That being said, I'm gone.